HF bands. Such propagation patterns are seen when the solar activity increases the ionization in the ionosphere close to sunspot maximum in the solar cycle. Occurrence of HF characteristics on VHF band enabling long-distance communication is the reason for 6 meter being called as the magic band. As discussed earlier, sporadic E propagation, mostly around the summer solstice, allows single ES hop communication up to 2500 km. Multiple hop communications enable intercontinental communications up to 10,000 km. Timing of sporadic E propagation is different in the northern and southern hemispheres according to the difference in the timing of summer solstice. Another special type of propagation near solar cycle maximum in 6 meter band is the trans-equatorial propagation, which can enable communications at 6,000 km between stations equidistant from the equator. Mechanism by which trans-equatorial propagation occurs is the presence of equatorial anomaly, which is a high concentration of electrons on either side of the equator in the region of 10 to 20 degrees latitude. The signals are reflected by one anomaly to the other and then back to the ground on the opposite side of the equator. I had discussed earlier on why 6 meter is called the magic band. While you can predict signal paths on HF by your knowledge of gray line propagation, summer and winter long paths, and by software support like VOACAP, Voice of America Coverage Analysis Program. But on 6 meter, it is pure magic. We never know when some paths will open and when some will not. In fact, when the digital mode FT8, which is now popular on HF, was created by Joe Taylor K1JT and Steve Frank K9AN, it was described as being designed for multi-hop ES on 6 meter, where signals may be weak and fading, openings may be short, and there is a need for fast completion of reliable and confirmable QSOs. ES means E sporadic in sporadic E propagation, which can be between regions of sporadic E layer ionization patches or between the sporadic E patches and the ground. Multiple ES hops are expected to weaken the signal, and hence the reason for initially proposing FT8 for 6 meter multi-hop ES propagation. Now, why is 6 meter sometimes called the tragic band as well? That is because 6 meter being a VHF line of sight propagation frequency, if none of the special propagations like sporadic E, trans-equatorial propagation, tropospheric scatter and aurora scatter are available, the band can be quiet for months at a time. In fact, that is what I also found while trying to monitor 6 meter using some of the few web STRs out there which cover that band. Having said that, in places where there are 6 meter repeaters, the magic and tragic may not be there. K117JEF, old call sign KB1SYV, maintains a page on QSLNet listing 6 meter repeaters. None of them seems to be linked to Echolink. All of them have 1 MHz negative shift. While some of them have tone squelch, most seem to have private line, which I do not know what it is. There are about 60 repeaters in the list. Another list of Southern California open 6 meter FM voice repeaters is also there. Those 6 meter repeater inputs are mentioned as -500 kHz. There seems to be 21 6 meter repeaters in the United Kingdom as indicated by a Google search result. But the actual page is beyond a firewall which cannot be accessed from my region. I wonder if anyone located in regions beyond the usual line of sight of the 6 meter repeaters have been able to access them by the magic properties of the 6 meter band. There are also rare hams out there who have quad-band handheld radios which have 6-meter band along with 2 meters 440 MHz and 1.2 GHz bands. Earlier, I had posted about trans-equatorial propagation on 6 meters or 50 MHz amateur radio band. 6 meters is usually called the magic band because of such unusual long distance propagations, and sometimes the tragic band, as at other times the band is virtually inactive. Few days back, a post on Twitter was mentioning that a ham in Hawaii would contact several hams in Europe by the transpolar long path over America. This kindled my curiosity to learn more about transpolar long path propagation on 6 meters. The propagation is noted when amateur radio operators beaming over the polar regions are able to contact their counterparts on the long path over the polar region instead of the short path over the equatorial region. Often, this leads to long path propagation on 6 meters, which could cover almost 3/4 the circumference of the Earth. Transpolar long path propagation on 6 meters typically occurs near the solar cycle maximum. Often, the contacts occur within an hour or two of midnight on the night side and within an hour or two of 11 am on the day side. Though usually signal strengths are weak, requiring more power output, occasionally they can be strong. The station from Hawaii, which reported transpolar long path contacts to Europe last week, was using only 100 watts on 6 meter and a modest 3-element beam antenna, which was kept on a tripod on the ground. It is better to some parts of the world, like in Europe, the so-called olive belt, courtesy my Twitter contact SP3RNZ. There seems to be a link between trans-equatorial propagation and transpolar propagation in that both have equinox seasonal effect, mainly in March and October, and the report I mentioned is in October. Usually, stations at both ends of the transpolar long path propagation are in the trans-equatorial propagation zone as well. Magic band and sometimes the tragic band. That is what 6 meter amateur radio band is known as. That is because you cannot predict signal paths on 6 meter by your knowledge of gray line propagation, summer and winter long paths, etc. as on HF. We never know when some paths will open and when some paths will not on 6 meter. Signals may be weak and fading, and openings may be short. That is because 6 meter being a VHF line of sight propagation frequency, if none of the special propagations like sporadic trans-equatorial propagation, troposcatter and aurora scatter are available, the band can be quiet for months at a time. We can look at DX cluster information on various websites which give maps and lists for checking how the 6 meter activity is at present as on other bands. Whisper reports and 6 meter beacons are another way to check the 50 MHz activity at any given time. Live DX cluster page from Radio Society of Great Britain gives option to know activity on all amateur radio bands from 160 meter to VHF and above. There is an option to view 6 meter activity on that page. Clicking on the link takes you to DX Lite page by G7VJR. The page gives recent activity, which includes call sign of the station reporting, frequency on 6 meter band being used, station worked, remarks, which often mentions the mode, and time in UTC. I could see 50 reports spanning over a period of 3 hours. I could immediately recognize that Most of the activity is on FT8, the popular digital mode available in WSJT-X. Reporting stations were from United States, Mexico, Chile, United Kingdom, Netherlands, Spain, Australia, New Zealand and Japan, representing 5 continents. One of the maps displaying live information on 6 meter was at DX Maps. When I checked just now, there were activities in North America and Australia, but only very few stations. There is color coding for the modes of propagation like aurora, sporadic E and tropospheric scatter as discussed earlier. That site has option for selecting other amateur radio bands as well. Filters are there for continents, modes, call signs, grid square and so on. As expected, activity was much more on the popular HF bands. There is provision for sending DX spots if you are logged in with information like your call sign, locator, DX call and locator, short comment and propagation mode. Unfortunately, I could not see any 6 meter activity from my region, possibly because it's a bit early for operators in this region to be active on a cool morning in January. Maybe I should check at other times. Distance covered by the spots seen were also low. Propagation modes seen to be active by the color codes were sporadic E and multi-hop sporadic E. I had a 10 meter half-wave dipole antenna mounted in an inverted V configuration. 6 meter is often called the magic band, and I wanted to try out the magic of 6 meter. So, after discussing with my friends online and offline, I thought of converting my 10 meter inverted V dipole into a 6 meter plus 10 meter fan dipole antenna. Measured out 1.4 meter of insulated copper wire with some extra at both ends for mounting and tuning, as each of the radiating elements for both sides of 6 meter. Remove the insulation at one end of each wire and attach to the existing 1:1 balun at the feed point. Excess wire at the ends were twisted on itself and the antenna raised using the pulley-like mechanism on the 22 feet GI pipe kept on my first floor balcony. Feed line was an RG213 coax. This video clip taken from the foot of the mast shows the positions of the 10 meter and 6 meter elements of the fan dipole. As there are only 2 sets of elements, I decided to have them at almost right angles to each other as recommended by one of my ham friends. First, I checked the VSWR on 10 meter to see if there was any significant change after adding the 6 meter elements. There was no significant change in the VSWR on 10 meter. Next, I checked 6 meter VSWR and found it as 1.9 at lower end of the 6 meter band and 3.0 at the upper end. I folded back another 5 cm of both elements and rechecked. Now VSWR is 1.1 between 50.5 MHz and 51.5 MHz. It goes up as we go beyond this resonant region. Currently, the 50 MHz band seems to have no activity on FM mode. I'll be monitoring the band using waterfall display in my radio and try calling back when I hear any station. It is well known that there can be no activity on 6 meter for quite some time, and that is why it is also sometimes called as the tragic band. I had a 10/6 meter fan dipole with a GI pipe as mast. As early rains with lightning had occurred in some places in my region, I thought of removing the GI mast and placing a fiberglass telescopic pole. Meanwhile, I wanted to reduce the clutter in the yard and pull down my end-fed half-wave dipole antenna so that the fiberglass telescopic mast which was being used for it became free. I used it instead of the GI pipe on my first floor terrace as the mast for a new fan dipole. As I am yet to hear any station on 6 meter FM, I removed the 6 meter elements and added 40 meter elements so that it became a 40/10 meter fan dipole. It is well known that half-wave dipole antennas will resonate on odd multiples while they are not suitable for even multiples of fundamental frequency. In that way, the 40 meter half-wave dipole resonates on 15 meter as third harmonic or 3/2 lambda antenna. What about 6 meter? My friend told me that it can resonate on 6 meter as well. After all, 6 meter is nearly the 7th harmonic of 40 meter. I found that the VSWR on 6 meter was in the tunable range for the built-in antenna tuner of my radio. 20 meter and WARC bands would show high SWR indication in the radio, meaning that it is beyond the tunable range of the built-in antenna tuner of the radio. Today morning, I was lucky to work 2 stations, one from Spain and another from Belgium on 40 meter SSB with this fan dipole antenna. Of course, band condition also would have been excellent at about 7 a.m. in the morning, suitable for grey line propagation from this region. Currently, I have used 2 CPVC pipes of 1 inch diameter as side supports for the 10 meter elements. Pulley-like mechanism using nylon